They told you this would never happen in America. They told you federal agents wouldn't occupy American cities. They told you U.S. citizens wouldn't be shot dead in the streets by their own government. They lied. Because right now, at this very moment, it's all happening in Minneapolis. And what you're about to hear will shock you to your core. 2,000 federal agents have turned the Twin Cities into a war zone. 2 American citizens are dead, shot by Border Patrol. Corporate CEOs are breaking ranks. Republican senators are turning on Trump. Federal judges are threatening to throw ICE out of Minnesota entirely. And the President of the United States is scrambling to contain the political fallout before it destroys his entire immigration agenda. This is not just another immigration story. This is a constitutional crisis that could redefine American federalism for the next 100 years. And nobody in the mainstream media is telling you the full truth about what's really happening. So let me break it down for you, piece by piece, because this story is way bigger than anyone realizes. December 2025. The Trump administration launches something called Operation Metro Surge. The official line: "We're going after dangerous criminal immigrants." The reality? The largest federal law enforcement deployment in American history descends on a single city. Over 2,000 ICE agents and Border Patrol officers flood into Minneapolis. Not the border, not a port of entry, a major American city in the middle of the country. Leading this operation is Gregory Bovino, a Border Patrol commander with a reputation for shoot first, ask questions later tactics. And from day one, things go sideways. Agents in full military-style tactical gear start raiding neighborhoods, stopping people at bus stops, pulling workers out of their jobs. Videos go viral, showing what looks less like immigration enforcement and more like an occupying army. Then comes the image that breaks the internet. Chong Lee Tao, a 56-year-old U.S. citizen, gets dragged from his home wearing nothing but underwear and Crocs. It's -15 degrees outside. He's wrapped in a blanket, shivering, surrounded by federal agents in body armor. ICE says they were looking for sex offenders at that address. Tao's family says those people never lived there. Tao gets released hours later with no charges, no apology, no explanation. Social media explodes. Protests erupt. Minnesota officials demand answers. But the federal government just doubles down. And that's when the killing starts. January 7th, 2026. Federal agents shoot and kill Renee Macklin Good. She's a U.S. citizen. The circumstances? Still classified. Why? Because federal authorities have blocked Minnesota State Police from investigating. They've sealed the crime scene. They've confiscated all evidence. Governor Tim Walz calls it a cover-up. Federal officials say it was justified, but they won't show anyone the proof. Minnesota is already at a boiling point. Then comes January 24th, the day that changes absolutely everything. Alex Pretty, 37 years old, ICU nurse, works at one of Minneapolis's busiest hospitals. Spent the last 4 years saving lives during COVID. He's at a protest, exercising his First Amendment rights. He's legally carrying a firearm, which is completely legal in Minnesota with a permit. He has that permit. Border Patrol agents approach him. Within seconds, the situation escalates. Multiple witnesses have their phones out recording. What they capture is absolute chaos. Pretty is backing away. The agents are advancing. Shots ring out. Alex Pretty drops to the pavement, dead. Killed by federal agents on an American street for the crime of protesting government policy. The video spread faster than wildfire, millions of views within hours. The Trump administration immediately defends the shooting. Pretty was a threat, they say. He posed a danger to federal officers. But here's the problem. As more camera angles emerge from different protesters, that story starts falling apart like wet paper. Constitutional lawyers point out that Minnesota is an open carry state. Simply having a firearm with a permit is not illegal. It's not threatening. It's protected by the Second Amendment. Eyewitnesses say Pretty was moving away from the agents, not toward them. The video evidence supports that claim. So why did they shoot him? And here's where this gets really interesting. Republican lawmakers start breaking ranks. Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy, a conservative who usually backs Trump on everything, calls the shooting disturbing and demands an independent investigation. That's massive. When your own party starts questioning you, when conservative senators start demanding accountability, you know you've lost control of the narrative. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who was Kamala Harris's VP pick in 2024, goes nuclear. He calls Operation Metro Surge an organized campaign of brutality. He demands that all ICE agents leave Minnesota immediately. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey backs him up, saying federal agents are poorly trained, out of control, and a danger to public safety. But Walz doesn't just talk, he acts. The state of Minnesota files a federal lawsuit arguing that Operation Metro Surge violates the 10th Amendment. They're claiming the federal government is essentially occupying Minnesota without state consent, trampling on state sovereignty. If they win this case, it would be one of the most significant constitutional rulings in modern American history. It would fundamentally limit federal power over states. Meanwhile, another federal judge is about to drop a bombshell. Chief Judge Patrick Schiltz orders acting ICE Director Todd Lyons to appear in court personally this Friday. Not send a lawyer, not file a brief, show up in person. Why? Because ICE has ignored dozens of court orders to provide hearings for people claiming unlawful detention. Judge Schiltz writes in his order that the court's patience is at an end. That's judge speak for, "You've been ignoring us for weeks, and now there will be consequences." When a federal judge uses that kind of language, it means someone is about to get hammered. Now watch what Trump does next, because this is where you see the political calculation happening in real time. On January 19th, Trump posts on Truth Social, complaining that there's too much media attention on ICE in Minnesota. Think about that. The sitting president is upset that the media is covering federal agents killing American citizens. During a White House briefing, he suggests maybe his administration has bad public relations people. That's Trump admitting, in his own way, that this is spiraling out of his control. After Alex Pretty gets killed, Trump does something he almost never does. He picks up the phone and calls Governor Walz and Mayor Frey. Two Democrats he's spent months attacking on social media. According to Walz, Trump agrees to consider reducing federal agent numbers in Minnesota. Trump agrees to let state police investigate the shootings, something he'd been blocking for weeks. And Trump announces he's sending Tom Homan, his so-called border czar, to replace Gregory Bovino. That's significant. Trump doesn't back down. Trump doesn't compromise. But when you've got federal judges threatening to expel your agents, when your own party members are turning on you, when CEOs are publicly condemning your operation, even Trump has to adapt or watch the whole thing collapse. And speaking of CEOs, this is where things get truly unprecedented. Corporate America, which usually stays silent on controversial political issues, is speaking out loud and clear. Minneapolis is home to massive companies. Target's headquarters, United Health Group, one of the biggest healthcare companies on earth, 3M. These are Fortune 500 giants with billions in revenue and hundreds of thousands of employees. And their CEOs are watching federal agents turn their city into a combat zone. J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon becomes the first major business leader to publicly criticize Trump's immigration crackdown. That's huge. Jamie Dimon runs the largest bank in America. He doesn't do political statements unless something is seriously wrong. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman tells his employees that what's happening with ICE is going too far. Apple CEO Tim Cook says he's heartbroken by events in Minneapolis and calls for de-escalation. These aren't progressive activists. These are billionaire CEOs who typically stay far away from partisan politics. But when federal agents are killing American citizens in the streets of a major business hub, even they can't stay silent. Their employees are scared. Their customers are outraged. Their operations are being disrupted. So they speak out. Consequences be damned. On January 23rd, hundreds of Minnesota businesses shut down for an entire day in protest. The Walker Arts Center closes. Schools see massive walkouts. Churches organize prayer vigils and demonstrations. This isn't fringe activity. This is mainstream Minnesota business owners, religious leaders, educators, all saying this has gone too far. Every single day, in brutal Minnesota winter cold, protesters fill the streets. Pro-immigrant activists demanding ICE leave. Counter-protesters supporting federal enforcement. The two sides clash. Federal agents use chemical irritants. People get detained. Videos show children caught in the chaos. It looks less like America and more like a country on the brink of something very dark. Representative Ilhan Omar, who represents Minneapolis, publicly calls for impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem over this operation. Days later, Omar gets physically attacked at a town hall meeting. The FBI is investigating. Civil rights leader Nakima Levy-Armstrong gets arrested on federal charges for peacefully protesting inside a church. Read that again. Arrested for protesting in a church. In America. In 2026. So where does all this go? Let me lay out the scenarios, because we're approaching multiple pressure points that will determine whether this explodes or de-escalates. First scenario. The federal courts rule against ICE. If Judge Schiltz determines that ICE has systematically violated constitutional rights, he could order mass releases of detained people. If the 10th Amendment lawsuit succeeds, the entire legal foundation for Operation Metro Surge collapses. Federal agents would have to leave Minnesota. That would be a massive defeat for Trump and would embolden other states to resist federal immigration operations. Second scenario. Congressional intervention. Democrats are threatening to block all Department of Homeland Security funding unless Operation Metro Surge ends. If DHS loses funding, the operation shuts down, whether Trump wants it to or not. But Republicans control the House, so Democrats need GOP defections, and those defections might be coming. Several Republican lawmakers are already questioning the operation publicly. If enough flip, DHS funding could actually get blocked. Third scenario: criminal prosecutions. If state investigators get access to evidence from the Renee Good and Alex Pretty shootings, and if that evidence shows excessive force or protocol violations, federal agents could face criminal charges. That would be unprecedented. It would send shockwaves through every federal law enforcement agency in the country. Fourth scenario: political collapse. If more videos emerge, if more American citizens get killed, if public outrage continues building, Trump might have to withdraw federal agents just to stop the bleeding. The 2026 midterms are coming. Republicans cannot afford to run campaign ads defending federal agents who killed U.S. citizens. The political math becomes impossible. Here's what nobody in Washington wants to say out loud, but everyone's thinking. What happens in Minneapolis sets the precedent for every state in America. If the federal government can occupy Minnesota against the will of state officials, if federal agents can kill citizens without state-level investigations, if courts allow this to continue, then no state is safe from similar operations. Blue states, red states, doesn't matter. Today it's immigration enforcement in Minnesota. Tomorrow it could be gun control enforcement in Texas, environmental regulations in Florida, labor law enforcement in Georgia. Once you establish that federal power can override state sovereignty without meaningful checks, you've fundamentally transformed American governance. On the other hand, if Minnesota successfully resists, if the courts rule in their favor, if protests and economic pressure force federal withdrawal, it creates a blueprint for state resistance. Other states would study what Minnesota did and replicate it. Federal power would face real limits for the first time in decades. And let's talk about the human cost, because 2 families have buried loved ones over this operation. Renee Macklin Good is gone. Alex Pretty is gone. An ICU nurse who saved lives during COVID, who worked exhausting shifts while people were dying by the thousands, shot dead by his own government for protesting. That's not a statistic. That's a human tragedy. Hundreds of people have been detained, many turning out to be U.S. citizens or legal residents, swept up in aggressive raids. Families torn apart, children traumatized, businesses shuttered, communities living in fear. Whatever your views on immigration policy, the human cost is real, and it's devastating. This week is absolutely critical. Federal judges issue rulings. Congress votes on DHS funding. Investigations continue. Tom Homan arrives in Minnesota to take command. The question everyone's asking is whether Homan will calm things down or make them worse. His reputation suggests the latter. He's known for being even more aggressive than Bovino. Minnesota officials are bracing for escalation, not de-escalation. What's happening in Minneapolis right now will be taught in constitutional law classes for the next 50 years. We're watching federalism tested to its breaking point. We're seeing the limits of executive power challenged in real time. We're witnessing whether American institutions can constrain a president who believes federal authority is absolute. This is not normal political controversy. This is not cable news noise that disappears next week. This is a fundamental crisis in American governance. 2 citizens are dead. A major American city is under federal occupation. Courts are intervening. CEOs are speaking out. Congress is threatening funding cuts. And the entire world is watching to see if American democracy can handle this kind of pressure. Pay attention to this story. Don't let it fade into the background. What happens in Minneapolis over the next few days will shape American democracy for decades. The precedents being set right now, the legal battles being fought, the constitutional questions being raised, all of it matters far more than most people understand. This is the moment when we find out if federal power has limits. This is when we discover if states can resist overreach. This is when we learn whether American citizens can hold their government accountable when it kills them in the streets. The answers to those questions will define what kind of country we become. And that's why this story matters. That's why you need to share this. That's why you can't look away. Because what happens next in Minneapolis will determine the future of American democracy. And that future is being decided right now, today, while most people aren't even paying attention.